Hey, folks, it's Nate, and it's time I got back to the drawing board. Tonight, I want to talk a little bit more about the creative process. Um, so far, we've discussed the pitch and the outline, and tonight, I want to talk a little bit about scripting. Now, let me start by saying that scripting is probably not as necessary as some other parts of the process as when it comes to making comics. Um, like if you're writing a novel, I really don't think you need anything beyond the outline. But for comics, if you're just the writer, a script is, of course, how you tell the artist what each panel needs to look like. But in my case, since I am both the writer and the artist, I typically skip the script stage and I just jump straight from an outline to layouts. And I think that's pretty viable for what I want to do right now. I'm working on a webcomic project. So, I don't think that paneling and where things, your page count and things like that are quite as important. Now, if you want a thing to be a cliffhanger at the end of a specific page, I usually just make a note of that in the outline so that I know as I'm laying out whatever page that's going to happen on, I just know that, okay, I want to get to about this point and then do the next page as the follow-up to that. But I think that if you're doing something like an Indiegogo or any kind of really hard copy thing that's going to have printing costs and things like that, your page count is a big part of your costs, and you're going to want to control for that as best you can. Your page count needs to be very, very strict, very well planned out, or it can cost you a lot of money. Printing is not cheap. So that's something you might want to work out ahead of time by scripting. You want to make sure you get through, of course, all your plot points in a chapter or in a volume or something like that. So that's an area where scripting, even if you are both the writer and the author, is going to be a big help. So what is a script? For a comic, at least, a script is everything that you want to happen panel by panel. So you list off panel one. We see Yu Deng getting caught in a fire blast. And in the bottom of the panel, we see Mark charging over. And then panel two, we see him thrusting his sword as it fires the firebolt into panel three, where it hits Frank. So that's a very simple script, and really you want your panels to be, or you want not your panels, excuse me. You want your script to be very light and fluffy. You don't need too many details. If you're both a writer and author, or an artist, you should be filling in those details as you're doing your layouts. As you're thinking of how you want your art to flow. And if you are not the artist, you don't want to either confuse the artist too much. We are easily confused creatures. Too much detail can just throw us for a tizzy, and you spend too much time thinking about it or trying to talk to the author and figure out what the heck's going on. And so trust your artist on that front. And you really don't want too much dialogue. It depends, of course, on the kind of comic you're doing, but really, you probably shouldn't have more than 3 sentences of dialogue in one panel. And on a page, you probably don't want any more than a paragraph if you have a monologue going, just like voiceovers or narration captions or something like that. And if you have multiple people speaking, then you probably don't want anything more than 10 to 12 sentences. And a double page spread actually doesn't double the amount of dialogue you can cram on there. So don't go thinking that. You probably don't want to have more than 15 sentences on a double page spread. Because if you have too much dialogue on any one page, your page starts to look like a manuscript rather than a comics page. Everyone says comics is a visual medium and the images need to tell the story, and that's 100% correct. But more importantly than that, if you have too much dialogue on a page, it starts fighting with the art, and your page just looks cluttered and confusing. People can't follow the flow as well. It gives them a headache, or they get confused, or it just feels blah. Very technical term there, blah. So yeah, you don't want any more than a certain amount of dialogue on any given page. It's very important to keep your dialogue under that limit. Now, like I said before, how much dialogue per page varies. If you're going for something like a rom-com comic, which they don't make in the Western market as much as they used to, but could really stand with a comeback, I suppose. For that, you could probably increase the amount of dialogue by maybe 20%. You could have maybe as many as 15, or if they're really short, 18 sentences on a page, because those are they're more character intensive. You need clear relationships, and people expect a lot of snappy, witty dialogue. So that would forgive a little more text. On the other hand, a very grim post-apocalyptic type story, well, those tend to be very, very sparse in all respects, and you might want even less dialogue, maybe no more than 8 sentences on a page, no more than 1 or 2 in a single panel, just so you can really play up that theme of loneliness, of isolation, of abandonment. But ultimately, you just don't want a whole lot of anything per page on your script. If you can't describe a panel in in 5 or 6 sentences, you need to rethink your panel. It might be more than one panel. You probably need to pare it down in some way or another. Again, a lot of these decisions are your artists to make. If you're just the writer, and if you are the artist, you probably already understand how difficult it is to show a large amount on a single page. And unless it's plot critical, unless a thing in the background is to become a key part of a solution to a problem in the future, you don't really need to spell out the background too much. Leave that in your artist's hands. So yeah, keep your scripts very light, very fluffy. A professor I had in college described writing a novel as baking a cake, and writing a script as baking a souffle. If it gets too heavy, if there's too much in it, it's going to collapse under its own weight. So, the writing a script is one of those things that you really start to get as you do it more and more. But there are a couple of very basic things to keep in mind as you spell things out. First of all, focus on who's in the panel and what the action of the panel is. There should be something happening in every panel. So even if people are talking to one another, comics are a very information-dense medium. Don't write pages that are just 2 people talking to each other. Nobody wants to see that. That is what novels are for. Write pages where people are talking while they are doing things, and make them interesting things. You can write a page that is 2 people talking while they fold laundry. If it's something like a rom-com, and you have 2 girls hashing over whatever the problem of the day is while doing laundry, or 2 guys at the laundromat making plans to go out to the club or something like that. If you're writing an adventure story, have people setting up camp while they're talking, or packing a knapsack while they're talking, or even just like climbing up a rock face, or there are all kinds of different things that people can be doing while talking. Now, in real life, do people talk and do things? Well, not quite as much. It is hard to speak and keep your hands busy, as you can probably appreciate if you watch my videos for any length of time, because I draw and talk, and it doesn't always work that well. But in comics, you want to be information dense, even if your characters wouldn't necessarily normally be talking and doing a thing, in real life. Your panel is kind of in some ways a time lapse. People may be talking and then doing something else while the other person responds to them, all in one panel. Read how much dialogue you have in a panel sometime. It can take 2 or 3 minutes sometimes, if you're, well, maybe not if you're writing your scripts well, but it can take 45 seconds maybe to read the dialogue in a panel if it's a long or large panel. That means that about that much time is elapsing during that panel, and you don't have to show everybody in the position they are when they're speaking. Show them doing the most interesting thing they could be doing in that time. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is if you're going to script out action, again, I really feel like unless something is vitally important to how the story is going to unfold, leave that in your artist's hands. I do not typically script action in any great detail before I draw, and that's probably to my detriment. I could probably stand to do a little more action scripting before I move on to layouts. But if you're scripting, just put down the very key actions, like stabs and fires a firebolt, gets caught on fire. Don't worry about things like the sound effects or what part of the panel people should be in. You either leave that up to your artist, or if you are the artist, deal with it when you get to the layout stage. Your script is to help you get a very solid idea of the basics of what should happen in each panel and how many panels to a page there are going to be, and then how that will stitch together the story over the course of however many pages you have. This is a very, very basic outlining tool. It is not the be-all and end-all of your story. So don't try and do too much, even for things like action. Another thing to think about is panel count. How many panels are going to be on each page. Different artists seem to have a different preference to how many panels should be the maximum on a page. Personally, after about 6 panels, I tend to find that pages get very cluttered, and it's hard to make anything more than that work for me. Now, I know I'm working on a bit smaller here paper than normal, but even on big 11 by 17 pages, I find that it's better to just try and keep it simple. I generally don't go for more than 6 panels unless I'm trying to show something very complicated happening in a short period of time, like a specific set of fight choreography, or actually, I haven't found a use for more than 6 panels on a page for anything other than fight choreography. Now, I know that some stories, like those by Alan Moore, they sometimes use a 9-panel layout. I remember Mr. Miracle used a similar layout as well. And that can work. It depends on what your artist is willing to do, and it depends on what kind of story you're going for. Again, you might want more panels to show a more natural progression of dialogue instead of snaking word balloons and balloon tails all over the place. But all in all, I would say no more than 6 panels and no fewer than 3 unless you want to do a splash page. Or you want to do something very close to a splash page, like if you have 80 to 90% of the page being one panel, and you have a small setup or resolution panel either in the top left or in the bottom right or something like that. But generally, I wouldn't do 2. I would say 3 to 6 panels is about the sweet spot, at least in the scripting stage. Again, as you start doing layouts or talking to your artist, more or fewer panels is something you can consider, depending on what kind of story you want to tell and things like that. All in all, and this is just me as a creator and as both writer and artist, I find that anything more than 6 panels starts to look just very cluttered. Anything less than that, at less than 3, it's kind of like, boy, couldn't you do anything else here? Unless you're going specifically for a highly impactful page, in which case, go for it. Do what you got to do in order to get the effect you want. But generally, for most purposes, 3 to 6 is going to get you done. So that's another thing to think about when scripting. And the last thing to think about when scripting is keeping it simple. The same as the first. Don't overdo it. This is just a step along the way. Your script doesn't have to be anything major, and even when it's a solo process, like a script is really just a part of the collaborative process, and it's to help your artist understand what's going on. And even if you're going solo, your script is just a tool for you to work out the page count and things like that. Start worrying about the details later. And this goes back to the fail faster idea. You want to hammer the script out. You want to get your ideas down, and you want to be ready to workshop them and brainstorm, and then move on to the next stage in the process. You don't want to get too hung up on it. So yeah, scripting, I don't think it's super important. I honestly think that just doing outline to layouts can work most of the time. But then again, I'm not a pro. I haven't done this as much as some others. And definitely if you're collaborating, it is vitally important to keeping everyone on the same page. So that's about all I got for today. There's a like button and a subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.